There are these little bristles. Are these all through the desk? There's like one there, one there.
Yeah.
That's what we can do in the other meetings.
So all we do is just play with the little flaps. All right. So this is Star Citizen Live, making ship up, which I believe you came up with in the car the other day.
I believe so. Hope people like it. If not, then I'll blame someone else.
Well, you're a very funny individual. People don't know that about
I'm
you.
renowned for that.
You're very outgoing.
Outgoing, funny, smiling.
So, Star Citizen Live, making ship up. How we make spaceships, if this were the Doctor Strangelove-esque subtitle there. We are in our Aegis conference room because our studio is undergoing construction at the moment. So we are here to do this here. Paul, Ben, John, you're here with us in LA. I wasn't going to pass this up. This is a pre-tape. So for the people who watch and they're like, oh, this is pre-taped. I'm like, no, it's live. Well, you're right this week. You're right. We are pre-taped this week due to schedules and constructions. But we still want to get you the stuff. So let's right off the bat, assuming that somebody has never seen the show before and somebody has never seen who you are before. Let's just go over real quick. Who are you? Who are you, Paul? Tell me. Who are you and what do you do for Star Citizen?
Who am I? It's a tough question.
I know.
I'm Paul Jones. I'm one of the art directors at Cloud Imperium, and I am responsible for working with the concept team, working on spaceships, working on weapons, FPS, and ship weapons.
Right. And first time on Star Citizen Live or RTV or Friday broadcast, but we did see you one time before on Calling All Devs. Ben, tell us who you are and what you do for Star Citizen.
I'm Benjamin Parr. I am the vehicle
Sorry,
What is it? What is the title, Ben?
What is your title?
You've never done this before. Sorry, you are the vehicle.
Wow, I usually have everything to say.
Everybody thinks this is easy to do.
I'm the ship pipeline producer,
Okay.
working mainly with the vehicle content side and not the vehicle feature side.
Right. So basically, you wrangle these guys and everybody else on the team to make sure
Ships get out on time, yes.
Right.
Yeah, he basically makes ship happen.
Yeah.
He makes ship happen. Right. There we go. There we go. If we only had some posts, we'd do a little makes ship happen graphic on it.
We can do that.
It is pre-tape. Maybe we'll do it. We'll see.
Paul will do it.
And then John,
I'm John Crewe. I'm the vehicle pipeline director.
and the funniest man at the table.
Absolutely.
All right. So,
It's going to be a good episode.
yeah. So we put up a thread collecting questions ahead of time because this was not going to be able to air live. Lots of questions came in. A lot of questions about specific ships. You know, what about this ship? What about this ship? Today's show, though, is about process and about the overall ship process. So the questions that we're going to do today are mostly focused on things that apply to every spaceship, if it were the pipeline from design to concept to white box to gray box to final art to flight prep, to where the ideas for spaceships come from, to why we prioritize some ships above others, and so on. So we're just going to jump into it. Let's start at the beginning of this process. Where do the ideas for spaceships come from?
They come from a variety of places. There's obviously, we have a lot of ships in the game. We have some very obvious gaps in lineup, so it's only natural to want to fill them up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have a new gameplay feature coming online that may not require a spaceship to do that job, but a spaceship would help extend that gameplay. And then there's also the wildcard director and executive, and really anyone in the team can pitch an idea for a spaceship, and sometimes if they gain enough momentum, they work their way in.
That's very true. Anybody is really open to pitching spaceships.
I'm not doing those ones.
Well, you already did. You already did the Vulcan. It's done. And unfortunately, I'm somewhat responsible for the Pioneer, which I need to apologize to you for. But we take ship ideas from all over the place. What are some of our inspirations? Do we look to real world inspirations very often?
Occasionally, yeah. Quite often, there's certainly real world analogues for a lot of spaceships, particularly in the military side. So everyone's got their sort of favorite World War II dogfighter or fighter or bomber, modern day things. The Vanguard always gets hard back to the P-52 Lightning.
Right.
I hope I got the right number there.
P-38.
38. Lightning. Everyone knows it. We have the Eclipse that looks like a B-2 stealth bomber. So the military side definitely has a lot more analogs. On the less combat side, they sort of have we want a space trucker ship, we have a space tanker ship.
So when we have a design, and we know this design is going to go into process, flipping my phone over for this lighting up here, it then goes to you guys to start the process of creating a concept. Now, we all know, we were just talking about the influences in design. How often do real-world influences come into play with concepts?
Not as often as you would think, really, because I mean, obviously we'll have the design direction from John. We'll have a steer from Chris. Because often I can get caught. Sometimes I'll follow one direction and Chris is like, no, it should be this. And I'm like, okay. But yeah, I guess that you'll approach it from a functionality point of view. You'll reference whatever you can. So obviously we'll just pull something off the internet. Obviously with spaceships it's kind of harder, but with ground vehicles, that sort of stuff, there's a lot more things we can pull upon. But really now, I mean, the team is pretty well versed, and so we kind of there's a lot of stuff to pull on. There's a lot of just natural experience as well. So these all feed in.
Now, we obviously have concept artists that work internally in the studio and also externally. How is that wrangling those two? How do we decide what goes to an internal artist, what goes to an external artist?
It's mostly Paul's judging of skills, and I don't know, it's basically his choice. If we'll usually we have an external artist we've used for a long time, and he trusts them, he'll give them more complex stuff. If not, then we'll use internal that can be done maybe quicker, it's less risk.
I mean, it varies. I mean, like sort of the Asperia Prowler, I think that had 4 concept artists on it, because we each, because it was a brand new manufacturer, everything. I mean, it was, on the one hand, it was awesome, and on the other hand, it's kind of terrifying because it's just a completely clean board. So basically we use different concept artists for different stages just to sort of push it along and get the best out of it, because the timelines never change. So it's like, okay, how do we hit this timeline? And you sort of use your assets basically to the best of their abilities.
Before we move on to White Box, I want to go back to influences, while not necessarily grabbing direct influences. How important is it to find things that connect emotionally? We look at the Temple Ranger most recently. The Temple Ranger is performing very well, and because it seems to evoke a lot of emotions in people when they see it. We've seen people compare it to Judge Dredd, or compare it to Akira, or compare it to the Bat Pod and whatever. And it doesn't necessarily look like any of those. There's this evocative sense that you work into these things.
Yeah, and I think that's the promo stage. I call it selling the dream. Basically, it's about selling the experience of what a player could have. And when I'm working out what shots to do, and I'm working with the marketing team, we'll pull reference from familiar movies, or we'll sort of say, okay, it needs to be this moody scene, it needs to have this sort of vibe going on in it, and sort of you try and tie it all together. It's just to, like I say, just to sell whatever it is, whatever the emotion is that you want to bring with that image. So I mean, it was good. I think the bike worked out pretty well in the end. I think a lot of people got on board with it.
How easy is he to keep on schedule?
It's quite easy. He's quite self-sufficient, actually.
Yeah.
And he knows what. The thing is, he knows what he wants. He'll plan out all his shots, and he just tells me whether it's going to be light or not.
Okay.
I remove the blockers for him.
Okay. So once we're done with the concept and the concept of motion is launched, and we when we eventually put the ship into production, the first stage is white box. Give me a real brief rundown of what white box is.
So white box is getting the fundamental geometry in. So quite often it, depending on the concept and depending on the concept artist, it could simply be taking the concept mesh, doing a very rough retopo or recreation of it, putting the absolute bare bones functionality in. So you'll grab a seat from another ship, grab a dashboard from another ship, and get that ship functioning. So it
Like a
functions.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, because you don't care that the concept has this style of seat. You care that the ship functions. We'll take the main geometry. We'll start splitting it up in the places that it needs to split up. So the idea for white box is that you have all that base set up in there, done by design. So design in an ideal world, which doesn't always happen, can just be hands off, and art can just sit there and just iterate on that file, and a fully functional vehicle is maintained at all times. It's just the art progresses. Doesn't always happen, and there's always a level of backwards and forwards between design, art, tech art. But that white box is really taking that concept and giving it an in-game presence that can be tested, because at the end of the day, when we do a concept, we can only check for so much, and we have to assume some things will work. Especially for like ground vehicles, you can't do a full suspension test in a bit of 2D art. You need to get that vehicle in-game and run it over rough terrain, because the clearance might not be enough, the axles might not be wide enough. And it's at that point we go, yep,
White
this works.
box is almost a validation of the concept, and
Yeah.
the place where we address all those issues that weren't found during the concept
Yeah.
phase.
It's certainly, we've changed the process over the years, and we run into a lot less of them now. A lot of the older ships never had that level of concept done to them. And
Yeah, we didn't have the metrics.
yeah, there were no metrics. It was, does this look cool?
I mean, we have a whole
Yeah, let's do it.
whole suite of metrics now that we can just give to the concept artist and say, okay, here's all your chair heights, seat heights, toilet heights. Here's where the sink should be.
Yeah.
Here's like all that sort of stuff. Here's where the button should be.
If you're getting out of a bed, you need this much space on the floor. And if you've got beds on each side of a corridor, you need to account for both people getting out of bed at the same time and not clipping into each other. So that's why ships over time, especially from concepts, can grow in different dimensions. It's like, why have they just made this ship randomly wider? It
Right.
was 99.9% going to be, it doesn't work with our animation system.
Yeah, it's one of those things in a real world submarine, you can have these super tight corridors because human beings can put their arms up like this and kind of scoot past each other in a hurry. But in a video game setting, when you're in a hurry and you're just running and you just hit each other's stuff, things have to often cheat a little wider than they normally would in real life. And white box is the phase where we get to figure that stuff
Our character
out.
models, like, if you were going to make a collision mesh for me here, I'm not a big cylinder. I'm a sort of squish cylinder, so if I turn sideways, two of me can go like that down a path. But in reality, our collision it's a capsule, so it's really a cylinder with rounded edges, because if I spin around on the spot, my shoulders fill up that entire void, as we don't, having that is a lot simpler to calculate than having a more complex shape. So we can't have, like you say, the submarine example of two people going sideways past each other. We need to have a wider corridor that can fit two people going shoulder to shoulder.
I think we learned that lesson on the Valkyrie when
Yeah.
it turned out like the doorways weren't wide enough to fit two people through if they were wearing the largest armor, so we widened them slightly.
And then, yeah, because the Valkyrie had those troop bays in it, we ended up with this sort of conga line. Just,
It wasn't quite tall enough either, were the doorways.
The Valkyrie was interesting because it was developed, straight to flyable.
Yeah.
So it still had the concept phase, it still had a white box phase, but the community didn't get to see that until it was all said and done. So I bet there's quite a few stories from the
Oh,
day.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Ben. You just told us what white box is. What's gray box?
Grey box is where the geometry is essentially finalized, and going from grey box into final art, geometry is locked and doesn't change. So then it's just about finishing off the materials, Maybe dress in with props if needed, but grey box grey box is locked GO and shouldn't change.
A lot of the times when we show ships in development in around the Burst or inside Star Citizen, they'll often be in gray box phase, where it's very easy to look at gray box and think, oh, well, that looks done. That looks done. Like when we showed the Carrack a while back, and some of it was gray box. It's like, and people are flipping out, and we're just like, that's just gray box.
Yeah.
Wait for it. You know, so a gray box has that wonderful danger to it, where it can look finished, but at the same time you can go, well, that doesn't seem like it's all that much, but it seems like it's finished, but it's not.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when folks see a ship in gray box, a lot of the 890 jump they've seen this quarter has been in gray box and stuff. It's very easy to look at that and go, well, that's not, is there more to that? And of course that leads us to the final art phase. Paul, what's final art? I know you don't even work in final art, so I'm going to ask you.
Do you want me to guess?
Sure. I'm curious.
I would say, well, final art is basically, it's just a level of polish. It's basically just, at least in my head anyway, it's going through it, validating. That's a good word, isn't it? Going through, checking all the shaders, materials, performance in terms of amount of shaders. Does everything operate as it should do? Animations, VFX, lighting, fog volumes,
decorating the scene, as it were. If this were a set, this would be the set decoration.
Yeah, adding props, and finding opportunities for life, basically. Where you want like little blinky lights or little whatever it is that you want to put in the ship.
How do you do?
Good enough.
Right? And then, of course, the at the end of final art, you would think the ship is built. I mean, you could certainly load it into an engine and take some pretty pictures of it, but there's still the last phase, flight prep.
Yeah. So,
flight prep.
As you say, like once a vehicle gets to final art, that's a fantastic portfolio piece, but it's not a game-ready asset. Certainly not for our game, because that's what we call the 100% pristine model. That's what you see when you spawn that vehicle. We then need to do all the damage setup, so that's the UV2 wraparound. So when you shoot it, you see the little burning of the textures and seeing the hull underneath. That all needs to be set up. All the shield set up, all the optimization, LODs, all the stuff that isn't really glamorous to do, but is essential to get that vehicle to work in game.
All right, so we've basically taken us through. That's super high level, of course. If anybody watched the old Ship Shape episodes, they've seen how the pipeline. Those are the 6 tenets at the top, and then they break down into 100 different subsections. But I wanted to just set the stage for the folks who haven't been following, who didn't see the Shipyard series of articles from 2 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, who haven't seen the old Shipships or whatever. So now that we're kind of caught up on the overall process, I want to get to some of the questions that came directly from our backer community. Right off the bat, how do you prioritize what ships we work on? Now that we've heard that Squadron 42 can bump something up to the top of the list, but not every ship that we've put into the game is used in Squadron 42. So how do we decide what the next ship to put into production is?
So it's a very fluid thing. I don't think there is really one particular.
There's many different aspects to it.
So you obviously mentioned Squadron. That's a big driver of it. Another one is ensuring that there is some ship content in every quarterly release. And as every ship takes a different amount of time, and we have different amount of resources in different studios. Right. If you gave the same ship to the 3 studios that work on vehicle content, they would all come back with a different end date because they have different capacities. So depending on when we want a ship to release, defines when we want to start it, which also puts other gaps in the schedule. So if we know we want to have a ship finish at X date, and that team is currently working on something that's going to finish at Y date, which is 6 months before, we can't just have those guys sat around for 6 months just not doing anything. So if there's a ship that we have that those guys could do in 6 months, that will go in there, which explains why sometimes it seems quite random, where a ship will just be not on the roadmap to suddenly on the roadmap, done for the next quarter. It's because that swap has changed. It might also be tied to gameplay features. We try and work with the gameplay guys to go, right, this quarter you're doing this gameplay feature, so
When possible.
yeah, when possible, we'll try and deliver a ship.
Yeah.
That's not always possible. Sometimes we'll slip on the vehicle side, sometimes I'll slip on the feature side, sometimes we'll both slip and we'll slip different amounts.
Needs
And that
of
all
the
just knocks
company
on.
as well.
Yeah.
Needs of the company, sometimes what Chris wants, what he wants to see in game too,
Yeah.
what John wants to see in game, what makes sense with other things that are in game.
Yeah, there's no point just, I mean, we could sit down now and completely change the schedule and just focus on doing capital ships that we have in our backlog, but
We wouldn't see a ship for 9 months.
yeah,
while
you
we
would see a
work.
ship for 9 months, and that ship is for a very small amount of the community that have it. You could argue that it'd be better time spent doing multiple smaller ships than that.
I think you also made a point earlier on about picking the right artists. I imagine not every person who builds ships for Cloud Imperium games has the aptitude or skill set to work on every type of ship. Like some artists, would be their personal styles would be more appropriate to work on a Drake ship, and some of the artists their styles would be more appropriate to work on a Mist ship. And when you have an artist come free, you want to keep that artist engaged. Like you said, you want to keep them working. And yeah, we wanted to do a Drake ship next, but this artist isn't really the right fit for Drake, but they are a fit for Mist. So maybe we pull something from Mist up ahead to make, since they have that opening, and keep them going.
Yeah, it works the opposite way as well. For instance, on the 890 jump, there's certain artists that needed ramp up time to get used to that art style because they'd been working on something from Aegis or Anvil beforehand, which is it doesn't have the curvy flows to it. So we need to think about that when we're also scheduling in the ships.
And as a reverse of that as well, we can also sometimes find that if someone's worked on the same style of ship for a long period of time, they're great at doing that, but they're absolutely sick of doing that art style. And they're begging to do another one.
Right, keeping your artist engaged has to be a super important aspect. I mean, even working on the coolest spaceships in video games must be kind of tedious working on your 11th Aegis ship in a row, Junker.
Everyone loves Aegis ships. Makes them more.
We took a whole year off the Aegis, and I was so happy.
Year of Aegis.
It was the year of Aegis for a while there. All right. When designing the look and layout of a ship, how do you weigh functionality and sensibility versus obvious rule of cool? The ship's got to be cool.
Yeah, but we've sort of we haven't shied away from it. We've moved away from just deliberate rule of cool stuff. It's a lot more informed.
So you're admitting that for at least a little while we were very rule of cool.
Seems like a trick question, but let's just say that we're a lot more considered now and about, there's the functionality which is king, but then it does have to look badass, and Chris never lets us get away with it. Do you know what I mean? We all know I've had some horrors in my past, but we always get there. So it's sometimes it's just difficult, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You're reliant on the artist, and you've literally just starting with a blank piece of paper, and it's like, okay, how do we make this super cool thing that's not been seen before, that hopefully doesn't get accused of being someone else's ship, even if it's not, all that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, it's always a bit of a struggle because, sometimes functionality does define where you end up at, especially if you're making a realistic kind of game. If we do something that just utterly ridiculous or fantastical, Chris is just going to go, no, that wouldn't work. And so, you're brought back to reality, and again, that affects the strokes of the pen, basically.
Yeah.
The next question from the backers is a great follow-up to this. How hard is it to design and build spaceships when certain gameplay mechanics aren't fully implemented yet?
It's a big challenge. If we're doing a ship that has a gameplay feature that we know is not going to come out with the ship or is not going to come out anytime soon near the ship, we'll try and talk with like Todd, Tony, Chris and get their high-level download of where they see the feature to be. And then when we're building that ship, we try and think of a way that minimizes rework for us down the line. Say we've got a ship with a feature that requires a big interactable thing in the room. we'll try and build that room where the thing you interact with can be easily taken out and replaced down the line. It's not integral to the room. It's not built into the mechanics of the room. So instead of having to redo that entire room, you're just redoing that one piece.
Building it modularly.
Yeah, building it modularly, or just building it very carefully. You know you're almost certainly going to have to go back and do something to it. You might as well not redo the entire ship for the sake of that.
Yeah, there's a common misconception that the folks who build the spaceships build the gameplay systems that those spaceships utilize.
You do not want those guys.
Yeah, no,
building
it's gameplay designers, ship designers, stuff like that. Paul, starting from the concept stage. Now this is they've got to build it, but when you're concepting a ship that's for a gameplay feature that has a basic design to it, but it's not implemented. It's we don't know how it will actually work in the game. How does that affect your design?
It's tricky. I mean, John and his team do a good job of giving as much information as we can, and then
You do better.
I mean, everybody could do better. But it's. I mean, let's take like the Vulture. That one, we haven't done salvage.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah,
Salvage, yeah. And so we did quite a lot of designs for that one. And we went one direction. It was quite basic. It was going to be that sort of transit van with a sort of some kind of like recovery arm on it or something like that. And then we did a whole bunch of things, and eventually Chris was just like, no, this is like the ugliest ship I've ever seen. And then so we're like, all right, I guess we're back to the drawing board. And so it was then just very much okay. Initially then it was a little bit of rule of cool, but it's driven by gameplay. It's like, okay, I'm sat in a cockpit, I've got this, I'm doing this task. How do we make it as visceral and interesting as possible? And that basically was how it arrived. And so, that's how we got the two arms, and we got the tractor beams pulling all the pieces, and it was like, okay, that is going to make it a pretty cool experience, all this stuff coming in. But I mean, there's always that you're not sure what problems you may hit, and so
You don't know what you don't know.
exactly. So you come up with a couple of options, or two or three, and then you present that to everybody, and then so people can go,
Yeah.
that's
There's the
cool.
key stages of the concept phase where we provide some options to Chris of possible looks. Once he's like happy with one, we'll move on to the next stage where it's like a first pass. It's like a white box of like the production phase. And at the first pass review, we get every single discipline involved to call out what they see, what could go wrong with this ship, so we can change it now. Going from there is the second pass, where it's like grey box final, where everything's locked. It's like, this will go into production next. Again, but we give them the opportunity to call stuff out.
Right.
If it doesn't get called out there, it becomes a very expensive thing to change. in
Change.
production.
Yeah, you want to try to minimize the risk there in
minimize
the
the risk.
concept phase. What the next question is actually about that. It says, what's the biggest problem we've ever encountered down the line that wasn't from a concept? Like you design a concept one way, and then when it comes time to build it, you're just like, oh my gosh, this just won't work.
John's looking at it.
What this?
Yeah.
The Vanguard?
Yeah,
I love the Vanguard.
I love that.
I love the Vanguard.
it's a really nice image. It's a really nice concept model, but there are some serious
not there.
metrics problems with it, which
From
is
the,
why
from the original concept.
from the original one, which is why it ended up the way it did. There was other reasons why it ended up the way it did, but a big reason of why it ended up like that was this was made without the metrics that we have when we built the ship. So, like I said earlier, when you have to fit certain things of a certain dimension into a space, sometimes you cannot keep the integrity of the visuals.
And when you say without the metrics, you mean that the metrics themselves had developed since the concept
Yes.
was done.
Yeah.
So the concept was done under one set of metrics, and then
Yeah.
the game progressed.
Yeah.
And then when it came time to build it, those metrics no longer applied.
Yeah.
New doors had to be wider, chairs had to operate somewhat differently.
Ship items that I think had.
All the
Yeah,
components.
When that was done, I don't think we had metrics for the ship items.
Right.
And that was a key feature of the Vanguard, was it has double the items
Yeah.
for redundancy, which when you have to find space for all those things in there, is a lot of space.
There's actually a great article coming out in this month's Jump Point about the Vanguard rework of August. So I don't want to spend too much time on it because folks can check out Jump Point and read about it there.
It's going to be great.
And that's my plug for Jump Point. Okay. All right.
But that's just my worst one. I don't know if anyone else has got.
I don't. I mean, you would know best because
You don't have
you're
to
the
build
one.
them.
Yeah,
You just create the
Yeah.
problems. He's the one that has to deal with them.
exactly.
Okay. So we were just talking about rework. The Vanguard's undergoing a rework right now. What's not an easy word to say? What are some of the main reasons that we have to rework ships?
Number one is probably the metrics. If it's not for components, or because every ship has components, they are all going to be in a physicalized location inside. Obviously, we don't want to cheat things. If the ship physically can't fit everything it's supposed to have inside of it, something has to change on the ship. We've done a huge pass on the animations, which I think people have noticed in the recent patches, but they perhaps not understand why things have changed, like the cockpit or the little terrapin fans with the cockpit seat height thing. That was fixed as part of a completely global change to every single animation in the ships. So previously they were just one canned animation for getting in. We've split that up into the individual chunks, so now design and animation can stitch them together in any different combination. So when we were designing ships before, we'd say this ship uses the Gladius enter animation. So we had a template file and it had the ladder touch points. So that ship was built around that animation, the entire animation. So you had to get in a ladder of the exact same metrics as the Gladius into stepping over a bit of the wing that is the same size as the Gladius, down into a cockpit that is the same size as the Gladius. That's all now split up, so you can
have the sequence animations now.
So you can mix and match, say, going up the Gladius ladder with getting into the Hornet. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. But that meant all the ships have to be vetted to fit things. We found examples. The Avenger and the Eclipse supposedly used the same animation. Turns out they did not in game. So when we fixed the animation, the Eclipse just, you were walking inside the geometry as you went up the ladder. That's because someone had just done a sneaky little fudge to the animation, saved it as Avenger 02, job done. So we had to remodel bits of the Eclipse to get that to fix.
Happens.
As well as that, the more we make the ships, the better we get at it, and the more our art style gets better. So look at the 300 series, for example.
Right.
They were one of the first ones to be made.
Yeah.
I wasn't around then, not that old, but
You're only 6 years old.
that's correct. Good beard. But with the 300, the rework and the 600i, completely different style. So reworking it made it look way better than it does. So art styles evolve and iteration.
Yeah, and I think in 3.5, the M50, nobody will have noticed this because you just can't have seen it, but the M50 was actually carrying around the old damage model this entire time, where instead of having the UV2 damage, it had the four
People notice.
bespoke modeled damage states for every single part. Because we didn't have the UV2, you literally just swapped the left wing from 100% to 75%. So in the old days, we had to model a ship 4 times to do that, and then you'd swap between it. That's gone now. And that's probably the oldest ship in the game that hasn't had a touch. And that's on the roadmap soonish for a update pass.
Now, I'm glad you said update pass. On the public roadmap, we see a lot of different terminologies thrown around
we go.
for the ships.
Sounds
This
like
is
production
this isn't even on the list. This is just mine. We see improvements.
Yeah.
We see updates. We see reworks. Tell us what the difference between these three, and are there more than 3? Like, what does improvements mean? When we sit there, when we look at Merlin improvements, what is Merlin improvements mean?
I would say there's really only 2, and it's just different people saying the same thing. So rework is
Rework.
like a complete ground up rework of the ship. Nothing remains of it. Improvements or updates is like what we're doing with the Merlin. So that core geometry stays the same. We're just perhaps redoing the materials to modern standards. We're updating the LODs. The big thing with the Merlin is just redoing the interior of the cockpit to match the metrics we have for UI now. So it had bespoke UI before, but it was very small compared to what we had deemed as our minimum screen space for UI. So that's been adjusted to fill that. And really that's just, it's an update or improvement. It's not a rework because it's only a tiny part of the ship has had a complete rework. The rest has just had a touch up.
And oftentimes we've been going through and doing minor improvements to ships for like ship components and stuff, just making sure that they have the appropriate spaces. Sometimes just adding doors.
Yeah, we don't tend to put them on the roadmap, like those ongoing quality of life changes. It's, if an artist is spending a considerable amount of time on it, then it goes on the roadmap.
Because some folks may have seen slight subtle changes to existing ships.
Yeah.
There's no mention of it on the roadmap or whatever. Like that's for the component work and updates and all the sizing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right. We just did those two right there, and that whole thing. So we're gonna skip past
Efficient.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into some of the meatier why we do things the way we do. Can you explain? Always a good question when it starts with "Can you explain?" Can you explain? I don't know why I'm getting so high and nasally there.
Keep going.
Can you explain? Can you explain why we place turrets the way we place them? On many ships, they are not really in optimal placements, like the Starfarer back turrets or the Freelancer turret that blocks the cargo entrance, Constellation turrets, etc. Why do we do this?
3 very different answers to those things. Part of it is
got to-
the old concepts where
Legacy.
those things weren't really thought about as much as they are these days. We just go, want a turret on the top and the bottom. That'll give great range of fire. Done. Whereas these days we do a lot more at the concept stage of putting cameras in the turret positions and going, that doesn't quite look as good as it should do. It doesn't cover where we want. So we'll change it, and then Paul will work with the artist to adjust that. Generally at the design brief stage, we'll go, it needs to be 5 turrets, ideally 1 or 2 pointing this way, 1 or 2 pointing this way, and then we leave it to the art guys to pick a combination of what can hit those goals and what looks best. The Constellation ones, they're not great. I don't think anyone's a fan of them. But it's
also
quite
a starter ship.
It's Constellation's a starter ship.
Well, it's one of the ships that is one of the ships
Yeah.
you can start Star
Yeah.
Citizen with. It's you pledge for it. It's
Yeah.
one of the ships that you can get a game package with back in the day.
Those turrets are also sort of part of the style of the ship. If we change them to be something that was significantly better, you ruin a lot of the aesthetics of the ship. The Starfarer rear ones, the old flippy upside down turrets didn't work well, which is why we spent a lot of time on the Valkyrie lower ball turret, where you stay the right way up. You gimbal with the turret. That makes the experience much nicer. Ideally, for ships like that, we'd want to go back through them and change them. There are some other considerations we need to do for that.
Are you committing to that, John?
Yeah, I was going to say
Not on
that
camera.
that is not the same as committing to going
No.
back. That's
In an ideal world, we'd love to do that. We learnt a lot doing the Valkyrie, and that should be put back into the other ships. What was the other one there?
the Freelancer.
Freelancer, those prongs were always supposed to fold up into the ceiling. We will do something about it someday. That one I will guarantee.
All right, we're done here, everybody. So there. All right. I have to imagine there's also an element of game balance. Not every ship can do everything. You don't. It's very. What we see very often is somebody will pick a ship that you'll create some imagery that's just awesome. Maybe not too awesome. I don't want to make you. It's somewhat awesome, and we'll fall in love with that ship. And now instantly we want that ship that's now become our favorite to be able to do anything. Like we want it to have turrets that cover 360-degree firing arcs around the entire thing. We want it to have the best armor. We want it to be the fastest off the starting line. How do you balance that? How do you resist the urge to just not make every single ship the best ship they can be?
The gate checks that we have at the concept phase, that is exactly what that is for. Every discipline will get involved and say, I don't like it this way, this will do this, this will do this. That'll be our feedback to go away. reiterate on it, come back, show them again, and then maybe they'll be happy.
Yeah.
Then we do balance again for stats, and that's during the flight prep phase.
So you're saying that at one point there was a version of the Dragonfly where it was the best dogfighter in the world. You just had to scale it back.
We had some pretty cool versions.
Let's go the other direction, from the most capable ships to snub fighters. This question just simply says, how are snub fighters supposed to remain relevant? What are snub fighters
That's a
for?
very existential question.
Let's ask this one first. What's the role of snub fighters in the universe?
Snub fighters are
Snub craft. Not all of them are fighters.
yeah,
Don't want to
they're
pigeonhole them.
they're parasite ships. In terms of they require a sort of mothership to transport around. They don't have quantum drives. If you have a quantum drive, you're not really a snub ship. We give them a different name. It might be a scout craft or something like that. So they require another ship to cart them around, and they're really there to provide protection for things like the Corsair. It's a Constellation competitor. Constellation has a snub craft and 2 turrets. Corsair has 3 turrets and no snub craft. So it's sort of they provide that alternate defense. They're offensively, they're never going to win a huge fight. They're there to provide protection from things or provide deterrence.
Not just so it's you're not the Merlins, the Archimedes, the 85Xs and stuff like that. They're do you consider them full spacecraft in their own right? I mean,
I consider them full spacecraft. They're just they serve a particular subset of a role. So the ones that are fighters are there for that deterrence and defense. The ones that are racers, they're great racers in their sizecraft. If you brought an Archimedes against a souped up M50, you're probably not going to win unless something bad happens to the M50. The A5X is a great little 2-person runabout. If that's all you want to do is cart you and a friend around places between relatively local destinations, great. It's not a Starliner. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
are we gonna get our Starliner? You brought it up. I want my Starliner.
Immediately upon saying Starline, I regretted saying it. I'll say Endeavour now to balance it out.
You want to open that can of worms? Okay. A lot of players often see uses for ships outside of the strict concept of the first releases, i.e. the Valkyrie having cargo, or the Vanguard being used for exploration, the Vulcan being used for salvage and not repair. How open are you to allowing more creative flexibility in designs, and do you ever think of alternative uses for ships when you're designing them?
I mean,
It's an
you can't
interesting
stop the
question.
player doing what they want
Yeah.
with it.
That's right.
Because I mean, it's like the real
Don't
world
forget
drive. I mean, I could take somebody's Aston Martin and put a luggage rack on it and put a ton of cargo on the top of it if I
Okay,
wanted
Starfarer
to.
Racer.
Yeah, but no one's stopping me. But just because you can,
Doesn't
Sure
mean
you
you
should.
should.
But it's like a transit van as well. You can make it a racing transit van, or you could make it a cargo van, or you could make it an amphibious transit van, I guess.
You can spend a lot of money on your transit van to make it a racing transit van. You probably could have spent less on buying an actual race car, but
But,
two different experiences.
You can't. The fans are going to do what they want.
So is this ever a concept? Do you ever think about like how players might be able to swap out components and
Yeah, we
make some-
always think about we know what the players do, so we always know
what do they do? Jim?
everything that we think they're going to do and more. So when we're designing ships, we know like this is what we want it to do. We can make a safe bet that people are going to try and do this with it, forever asking what fits in what.
Yeah.
We know that everyone's always going to try and cram another ship inside another ship. Inside another ship.
Yeah.
So we know what we want it to do. We know within reason what it could do with some stretching. We can never think of what everyone would do
Reclaimer
with it.
arm wrestling.
Yeah, reliant jousting.
I mean, we don't do like a big bennies check, do we? Like, we don't like trying to figure out how many big bennies.
No,
Vending
we-
machines can get into the back of something.
If it's designed to fit something in particular, we'll check that, but we don't tend to check every single object that the universe can fit inside it.
I think the phrase we use is emergent gameplay. It's we put it out there for the intended purpose, and then the community, no doubt, shows us all of its other capabilities.
And the thing is, because we're quite an agile company anyway, if people are doing something repeatedly, we can start to incorporate that into future designs. I would say.
Yeah.
Like the dream of using the Caterpillar as a broadside machine, so they're loading it up with cannons or with rail guns or with whatever, and using it like old style sailing ship broadsides. It's
I've seen people with the Caterpillar with just doors open, arrows landed on every single one. It's now an aircraft carrier.
an aircraft carrier.
And that was never designed to be
Absolutely.
like that, but that's happened, and it's cool.
Next question is just about the overall ship pipeline. Is the current ship pipeline mostly optimized, or do you have more tools coming online that will decrease the time from design to flight ready? Are we happy with the pipeline? Are we set? Like, have we figured out the
I'm never
most
happy.
optimal way to make spaceships?
I'm never happy. It's
If you
never.
thought I was always unhappy, meet Ben,
Things can always be done quicker. Hopefully.
bean counter Ben.
In terms of tech,
I think we've got a good pipeline now. It's come on a long way. Things can always be better and smoother and faster. It's game development. Anything can happen.
yep.
I don't think there's a single big thing missing out the pipeline really that will go, oh, if we had this, we'd do ships in half the time. We're at the point where of like, diminishing returns on improvements.
That's where I have to do the disclaimer again. Building ships and building the gameplay systems, two separate things. We're talking about building the physical ship, not building the salvage gameplay or the repair gameplay.
Vehicle artists are terrible programmers.
Speak for yourself.
All right. This is almost like that. Can you explain? Can you explain
No.
when designing ships, why is the pilot's view so often overlooked?
Is it?
Is it?
Do you
Not
accept the
anymore.
premise of this question?
No.
Not anymore.
Not
Okay.
anymore. For the legacy stuff, yeah, it was like it wasn't part of the pipeline check. Now it is.
Yeah.
We have the seat, the pilot, the camera goes in the pilot's head. We get screenshots in front and left and right.
No more Strutgate.
It's
Yeah.
it's one of those questions that come up every single first pass concept review is what's the pilot's view like, and we can accommodate and show them, and then they can say, you need more space, restrict the view maybe for the characteristics of the ship. So that's where we take that.
It's one of those things that's hard because spaceships for other mass media, for movies, TV shows, comic books, video games, whatever, they're never built 1-1. They're never built to actual proportions and built out to direct specifications. So they can cheat a lot of those things. I mean, when you look at the interior of the Millennium Falcon, you look at the exterior of the Millennium Falcon, you go. I mean, I'm sure Disney had some struggles the last couple of years when they're building their life size down at Disney World. But those were some of those lessons we had to learn, quite frankly, the hard way.
Yeah.
From those early days when we were concepting ships the same way you would for a movie or a TV show, and then getting in there, developing the metrics over time, and seeing how these things actually work in practice in a 1-1 environment, and going.
Yeah, and the concept team, they put up the game. They go into ships and they're sort of evaluating sort of historical stuff. And so they're very much on board in terms of fixing those issues.
And like you said earlier, the thing with the Terrapin view wasn't actually specific to the Terrapin. It was a global thing that was happening.
Yeah. It was one animate. It wasn't ever the seat was designed to be that low. It was using an animation from another ship that was just incorrectly put on that ship.
I think the hammerhead, the window at the bottom of the ship, that came out of a first pass review because somebody said it'd be cool if you could see downwards, and then Paul's like, yeah, okay, I'll do
It's like that.
that. That's exactly like
Is that how that happens?
Yeah.
Can I see that again?
No, just one time.
How often do you take into account internal modularity, like changing? You talked about this a little bit before, but changing the rooms, decoration, storage, and furnitures. for example, the example they give is switching a weapon rack for a shelf. Do you ever, when building these, how modular do we get? How much do we protect ourselves for the future?
Depends on the ship. Sometimes we build the modularity for gameplay reasons, like the Retaliator modules. Like that entire room can come out and be a different room. But also sometimes for art production reasons, like the Vanguard Rework. The hoplite central pod room is, well, across all the Vanguards, it's essentially 4 bays now, 2 on each side. And Joe, the artist who's worked on it, has built those bays to be modular. I mean, if you want to go nuts, you could build a Vanguard variant that had 8 beds in it and no bathroom or anything, because they all just fit in those big slots. It's partly for ease of use in production, because for the other variants now, we've moved some of the bits around, and rather than building 2 beds on the left-hand side built into the wall, now we have to build 2 on the right side. It's literally taking the geometry and putting it back in another way. For the hoplite, we built a set of 2 jump seats with gun racks that go in that bay that can be cut and paste around. So it speeds up art production. It's more efficient in memory. You're just loading one asset and instancing it. You're not having to load duplicate geo. But for gameplay reasons, we tend to stick to big wholesale changes rather than letting you swap your wardrobe for a gun rack.
Now we use the term modularity a lot, and there's a stretch goal for enhanced ship modularity and whatever and whatnot. We essentially have 2 types of modularity. We have developer modularity, what we use to build the ships, and then we have player facing modularity. And you touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
The Retaliator rooms, the living room, the bomb bay. I can't remember what the other ones are right now.
Seats.
The jump seats
Drop
ones.
one.
That's player facing modularity.
Yes.
The stuff that will come through the ship customization feature when that comes more online. You can learn all about that on Inside Star Citizen. Watch it. That's player-facing modularity.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here, when we build the ships, that's the developer modularity.
Yeah.
That's to help with performance. That's to help with draw calls.
Yeah, it's the same on like the interiors of big ships as well. Those corridors aren't unique pieces. It's a 2 meter wall section, a 1 meter wall section, a 4 meter wall section, an inside curve and an outside curve, just repeated everywhere. It's part of the reason the Hammerhead was so quick to put in production, because that is the Idris kit with a new material on it and some new bespoke component hatches. The rest of that is all the work we've done on the Idris, rebranded.
And so, example of developer modularity as opposed to player facing. Have you taken into account how cargo or components will enter and exit ships physically? This person says in real life, you'd never load with an angled ramp. I think all ramps are angled.
I've seen
So
some.
can you have an unangled ramp?
It's,
I figure I've loaded up enough. Maybe they're talking about the specific angle. And
Yeah.
maybe they're saying the angle is too sharp or something.
yeah, we do have metrics for like ideal metrics for ramp angles. It is shallow. It always causes problems. But we do have a maximum one that we don't tend to ever go past. Ideally, in the real world, professional haulers load off docks, so it's just roll on, roll off.
Roll on and elevator up kind of thing.
But it's less thinking about the ramps, but more thinking about the access sizes. So if this is a cargo ship, can it actually take 1 SCU cargo boxes in and out of that space? If I stack it 4 high, can I get them out somehow? If this is a ship that's not going to use 1 SCU ones, it's going to use the big ones, is there actually space in there to do that?
What are the big ones called? There's one SCU.
They go up in quantities. Like the biggest one is a 32 or 64 SCU crate, which is what you would see strapped to the side of a hull C. You wouldn't have 4,000 and however many individual 1 SCU boxes on a hull C. That's just not efficient.
Gotcha. So the boxes themselves don't have a bespoke name. It's just a 32 SCU box.
Yeah.
So that's just a 64
Yeah.
SCU box.
They just come in like some predefined volumes for easy.
I learned a thing today.
There you go.
There are a few ships that have beds and no toilets. I'm just thinking about your 8 beds and no toilets Vanguard that you mentioned earlier.
This would be
When they were watching the show, they probably saw that look on my face. I'm like, just reminded me of summer camp. There are a few ships that have beds
you
and
not
no
have
toilets. Not the summer gap I went to. And if we're spending enough time in the ship, don't we? Okay, so let me try this again. There are a few ships that have no beds and no toilets. And if I'm spending enough time in my ship, there's some broken words here. Okay, they're basically saying if I have to sleep, don't I have to poop? That's basically what there's like 4 lines here, but that's really what they were getting at. If I have to sleep, don't I have to poop?
And this is sort of another one of those legacy things. When we do our design briefs now, we have like a drop-down tick box quantity for what level of onboard facilities do you have? Do you have no onboard facilities? Do you have Spartan, which is a bunk and a toilet? Do you have basic food making on there? Do you have a full kitchen? So yeah, there are some ships out there that might have a bed but no toilet. We might have to look at those in the future, but there are some that there is just a bed. It's not designed to be that bed is there for a gameplay purpose for providing logging in and logging out.
Breachable areas. We first talked about breachable areas back at Gamescom 2015, if I remember correctly. Do you implement breachable areas on ships outside of manned turrets, doors, ramps, airlocks? Are we still thinking about that stuff?
Less like fully dynamic breaching. There is some big tech hurdles to go there. There are certainly going to be predefined areas, like say the doors. You'll be able to destructively and non-destructively breach through those. Being able to all the turrets. Entry holes are a metric, which is conveniently the same size as docking collars. Make of that what you will. And then there's obviously like big windows that can get in, elevators. There's very few ships where there's only one way in, and those ones, that's a nice quirk of the ship that provides some defense.
Gotcha. So as we were making the ships, they still have these areas, the turrets areas, the door areas. But as far as anything else specific, more specific than that, I would say that probably depends on the development of the actual feature itself by the feature team.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to read this one?
One for Ben. Why is there a disconnect with the ship specs listed on the RSI website and the actual ship itself? Even after the updates, the website is more wrong than right in the majority of ships, even flight-ready ones.
I think what I'll do here is I'll defer to the ship pipeline director to give that answer.
Great, thanks.
Sorry.
So there's a few things. Both CIG and Turbulent want that to be better. It's a very manual process at the moment. And obviously, where it's a manual process, there's room for error.
Yeah.
And a big problem we have with it at the moment is those stats pages show stats for in-game attributes that just don't exist at the moment. So in an ideal world, we'd have a nice automated system that would look at the game files and then pull that, put it on the website. What do you do for stats that don't exist in-game, like jump drives?
Right.
Do we just fill our in-game data with fake data? That's going to be as prone to errors as manually putting something on the website. So yeah, that's the big fundamental thing that stops it from all being automated and forever correct. Again, when we spot things, we tend to save them up for batches and just push it out in a bunch, because if every time someone spotted something that was wrong on the stats page and we go call someone at Turbulent and say, drop what you're doing, this value is wrong, they would never get anything done either, because they have their own sprints and work to do.
Right.
And so we just factor it into update chunks.
Yeah. It's challenging because there are designers that work on ships in 3 studios around the world, and the process I've witnessed the process of balancing and tinkering with these things. It's flying around for 2 minutes, and then going in, tabbing and changing a number value, and then going in and flying. And I've seen a designer make 30, 40, 50 changes to just one single number in the span of 10 minutes.
Yep.
And tracking all that and documenting all that and making sure that I mean, having every single successive update would be a disaster, because if that updated automatically on the fly to the website, you could go to the website and in any 10-minute period you watch the stats of the ship go and change, be like, what the hell's going on? So it definitely has to be in batches. Even if we have this automated system, it would definitely still have to be in a batch, like a script that's run every 2 weeks or something, and go, okay, grab the current set of data. Plus there's the very real consideration that, and this is something I can speak to, that while we are constantly saying all stats are subject to change, and and this is game development, not game construction, and all things are all things are being developed and subject to change, we have a responsibility to minimize the number of those changes whenever possible. It doesn't do anybody any good to see the numbers on the Hornet change 15 times in a week. So or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's while that's a normal part of game design, a normal part of game development, is that tinkering, that balance. Having that be forward facing and seeing those numbers changes and whatnot. There are folks who don't follow every broadcast, who don't read every article, who don't follow the spectrum, who won't know what's happening. They'll just see that these numbers just constantly, and dramatically change over and over again. So there's a responsibility on our part to the feelings and considerations of the backers to make sure that while we have to change these things as many times as we need to figure out what the balance is, that when we update them, we do it in as responsible and as timely and as limited a manner as possible. So we're not just constant. The term that keeps coming to my head is "you're playing with my emotions." Every time you tweak something. So there's definitely a middle ground there. There's the answer is us getting better with our documentation and keeping that together and making sure turbulent gets updated, and not go swinging the pendulum so far the other direction that we introduce instability in the stats. So it's definitely a challenge. It's one that we've been working on for some time.
When we did the big stats page update, I forget when, but it was when all the shipyard articles came out. We had every single system designer that worked on ships look over their ship stats. They looked over each other's stats. We had all the marketing and community teams look over those stats. So it must have had 30, 40 people look at them, multiple versions, and they still missed things that the community spotted within seconds. And it's the same story for brochures.
Oh, the number of review passes is ridiculous. We have so many eyes, player relations, community, customer service, legal gets in there, design gets in there, the lore team gets in there, I'm in there. We're all looking, and we all spot things. I'm like, okay, on this version it's this, and the version it's this, and just even with all those eyes sometimes.
Yeah, when you look at the same brochure in 30, 40 versions of it, it's tough. It gets tough to keep track of what's happened, and then someone will change the phrasing on something that when you're looking at it, you go, yeah, that was what it was before, but it's completely changed the context of it. But because you've read 20 versions of it before, your brain just doesn't process it.
Which is why we bring so many people in, because we need fresh eyes to catch the things that you're not capable of catching the 30th or 40th time that you've looked at something. And of course, it's definitely something that we still strive to improve on and get better.
Definitely room for improvement.
We're actually at the end of time at this point. I got one last question from the community I want to give you. What's your favorite challenge when designing or building spaceships? I thought it was interesting. Your favorite challenge. What's your favorite challenge? What's the thing about your job that makes your job difficult that you like the most? It's essentially what they're asking. I thought it was interesting.
Well, me and John are two of the rare people who get to see it from Chris's head or John's head right up until the game, in the game. So I think from me, it's my favorite challenge is getting it out to the backers, but it's very challenging sometimes. Just keeping everybody on track, making sure everybody's communicating with each other, making sure metrics are correct, making sure that I don't know, Chris has seen it and he likes it. It's all those key stages that add up to the end point of getting it out. It's challenging, but I like it.
Tricky one. There's a lot of challenges. I think there's one challenge that I really sort of hate, but it's also part of the process, which was basically going from the ideation phase of sketches where you can go in so many different directions, and it's that sort of coalescing and transforming it into the 3D and really sort of picking your direction. Like that part is for me it's the most difficult because it's the most troublesome. There's a lot of feedback and a lot of iteration. But once we're on the road, like on the road to Rome, on the road to success, you're like, okay, we're heading towards second pass, great. Then I'm like, okay, know what I'm doing. We're on it. So it's just you can't hide from it. It's just part of the process.
I think the favourite but also the most challenging thing for me is not leaking ships that I know about that are in production, because we often work sometimes like a year, 18 months ahead of what people publicly know about. And there's been many times where I've been sat at events and talking with the backer, and they're like, oh, it'd be really cool if you could just do this ship and it's like this.
And you want so bad to say, like, it's happening.
I've already
It's
almost
coming
done it
out
4
tomorrow.
times during this interview, so...
Yeah. There's many things I've said today in this, and I'm like, be very careful how I describe this thing.
Yeah, the ship pipeline is very much living in 3 time periods. It's having to address and iterate on the things that have come before. It's working on the things that are actively in production right now, and it's still planning and laying the groundwork for things that are a year, 18 months in advance.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and keeping it straight isn't always the easiest thing.
No.
It's the only way I manage to do it. It's just I'm constantly talking about it, so I never get a chance to let it slip or let it fall back. It's just always there in the front of my head. Paul, Ben, John, thank you so much for taking the time, for flying all the way from the UK just to do this.
We didn't do that.
You didn't. Man, you couldn't even let me have it.
Sorry,
I just couldn't have it. All right, that's it. Thanks, and for everybody watching this special pre-taped version of Star Citizen Live, Star Citizen Not Live, making ship up, how we make spaceships. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thanks for watching. For the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can check out some of the other shows, and you can also head to our website at www.robertsspaceindustries.com. Thank you very much for watching.